Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
My wife, Rebecca, was in London again, shopping. Every year, it seems she spends more time away from home. Our marriage is barely recognizable now, but I can't afford to give her a divorce, and she doesn't seem interested in pursuing one either. Over the past 5 years, my software company has really taken off. After more than a decade of barely staying afloat, hardware technology finally caught up to my software, and business skyrocketed. 3 major companies have shown interest, and I'm just waiting for the right offer. The company's value now exceeds $10 million, mostly in stock, which I still hold. Around 8 years ago, Rebecca started working for a law firm in Reading. Back then, her paycheck was a huge help, though her hours were long, and she frequently had to make overnight trips, even though she was only a paralegal. I was so wrapped up in developing the new software that I didn't give her absences much thought. Up to that point, things between us had been solid. We had a great sex life, spent time together, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company, despite my erratic work schedule. But after about a year at the firm, things changed. Our sex life dwindled to almost nothing, and our relationship became barely platonic. I was unhappy, but chalked it up to a phase she might be going through. Meanwhile, our 2 sons were in high school and fairly self-sufficient. Brian was gearing up for Penn State, and Ryan was looking forward to joining the Marines. Rebecca's boss, at Caldwell Legal, was Jason Anderson. I met him and his wife a few times at company functions, and he seemed like an okay guy. One day Rebecca came home very upset and told me that Jason was dead, shot by his wife. She didn't go into any other details, but shortly afterwards she quit and never worked again. Our marriage did not improve. She became surly and argumentative. I would like to say she had some redeeming features or good traits, but I can't. I would try to avoid her as much as possible, but it was difficult. To make matter worse, she was pregnant. I was hoping the new baby would improve our home situation, but it didn't. Rebecca named our new daughter Rachel. She adored the girl and fussed about her constantly, but our relationship continued to get worse. As Rachel got older, Rebecca started to spend more time away from home. The company was making money, so we ended up in a new house with servants. Rebecca had a live-in nanny for Rachel and took full advantage of it. I never asked where she went or why. All I knew was there were a lot of expenses. Luckily, I was making the money faster than she could spend it, but I was upset nevertheless. I tried to talk to her and find out what happened between us, but she refused. Of course, the separate bedrooms didn't help. I had no idea what I did wrong, and so I had no idea how to fix it. I finally just gave up. A divorce would cost me a couple $1,000,000 and probably ruin the new company. I was upset with myself for letting it go this far. I had my own legal staff on retainer, but still could not see a good way out. Rachel was growing into a fine young lady. I spent as much time with her as I could. Rebecca usually kept us apart, but since she was gone so often, Rachel and I became good friends without her knowing. It was our secret, and Rachel enjoyed it. She was in 3rd grade now and doing well. I got to go to the PTA meetings and the teacher conferences. Rebecca was usually busy with other important things. Brian and Ryan were both on their own and doing great. My marriage sucked, but my kids made up for it. Then one day I got lucky. Carol Anderson was sitting in my office waiting for me. I was surprised because I thought she was in jail for killing her husband. She had aged well. Her hair was shoulder length and was a smooth mixture of gray, silver, and a little black. She had on very little makeup, and her skin seemed to have a gentle smoothness without being soft. Her eyebrows were natural and fit her face perfectly. She appeared to be hard and feminine at the same time. "Carol, this is a surprise to say the least. You look good." "Thanks, Kevin. I wasn't sure you would remember me. It's been 8 years, and I was certain I would be a forgotten person by now. Would you like some coffee? Black would be great." "Carol, I am in a very embarrassing spot here. I am, of course, aware of your situation and don't want to say anything to upset you. If I say or do anything that might be inappropriate, please feel free to correct me. I have been in jail for the last 8 years, Kevin. I am pretty well calloused about the whole thing. Don't worry about my feelings. By the way, how is Mrs. Smith? Not something I want to talk about. Shall we just say that things could be better? Sorry, but that is the reason I came to see you. I have to talk to you about Rebecca. I am not being vindictive or revengeful, but there are some things that I feel need closure." I placed the cup of coffee in front of her, but sat in the chair aside of my desk rather than behind it. I wanted to hear what she had to say, and I wanted her to feel comfortable while she was doing it. I hit the intercom button and instructed my secretary not to interrupt us. "Kevin, did you follow the trial at all?" "No." Rebecca mentioned what had happened, but I didn't have any particular interest in it myself. I was busy with the business startup, and she wasn't very talkative at the time. I guess she was upset at his death. More so that you would imagine, I guess. It appears that you have no clue about what was going on, so a lot of this will come as a shock to you. You said you didn't want to get me upset. Well, I feel the same way. I am going to explain things to you that are not pleasant to hear. If it becomes too difficult, just tell me and I will stop. Maybe we should have had some scotch instead of the coffee. There was a little half-laugh from both of us. On the day that I shot Jason, he was planning on leaving me and running away with Rebecca. Jason had stopped by the house just long enough to present me with divorce papers. Your wife was waiting in the car. They were going to come see you after they finished with me. I had been aware of their affair for some time and had documentation and a few pictures. The fact that he was asking for a divorce didn't bother me because I was planning the same thing. Carol, I had no idea. I was living in my own little world at the time. I guess it was my fault in a way that the whole thing happened. I am sorry that my poor performance as a husband contributed to your marital problems. There was more, Kevin. Jason had always wanted a family, and we were never able to have children. He was constantly complaining about my shortcomings as a wife and blamed the entire thing on me. When he handed me the divorce papers, he told me that Rebecca was pregnant with his child and that she was going to provide him with the family he always wanted. I turned and started to walk away from him, but he continued to insult me and call me all sorts of demeaning names. It was not enough that he was leaving and divorcing me. He insisted on making me feel as if I was less than a person. It seemed like he was never going to stop berating me, and finally I snapped, reached into the buffet drawer and pulled out the revolver. I don't remember shooting him. Do you mean to tell me that my daughter, Rachel, is Jason's? Rachel is not Jason's daughter, but I would imagine that Rebecca thinks she is. Can you explain that? I had myself checked several times. The doctors never found anything wrong with me. I finally got a sample of Jason's sperm checked, and he was totally sterile. I never told him. By the way, Rachel is the name of Jason's mother. I assume that was the name they agreed on when Rebecca found out she was pregnant. Rebecca picked out the name, but I had no idea where she had gotten it from. I think you are right, though. She believes that Rachel is Jason's child. Knowing that explains a lot of things. Would you like some more coffee? No, but I have some more things to discuss. Are you sure you have the time? We are fine. Don't worry about a thing. That's the nice thing about being the boss. When I went to prison, all of the things in the house went into storage. Jason's briefcase was included. I was going though it last week and found this. Carol handed me the original divorce papers that Rebecca was going to give to me the day that Jason got shot. The papers were signed, dated, and notarized. Jason and Rebecca worked for a law firm, so the terms of the divorce were very precisely spelled out. Is this still good? Carol laughed. I have no idea. I'm not a lawyer. Check out paragraph 7. She is giving me completed custody of all children. Wow, this would really piss her off if she found out I could get Rachel. Of course, the boys are long gone, but if I got custody of her little angel, she would go bonkers. Can I have this so my legal people can look it over? It's yours, Kevin. It has no value to me. I wish you well with it. Here are some more things you might or might not be interested in. Carol handed me 2 manila envelopes. The pictures that my detective took are in the small envelope. They are very sexual in nature. I have no use for them, but maybe they will be of value to you. The large envelope contains the investigation results that my PI gave me and some other interesting papers. You can look them over and decide what is important to you. Thank you. I really don't want to look at them, but I will give them to the lawyer with the papers. We both sat and looked at each other of a few moments. She was a very impressive woman, and I was glad she came to see me. I better go and let you get back to work. Thanks for seeing me. I feel better getting these loose ends wrapped up. By the way, you don't have any job openings for an ex-con, do you? Seymour Schlamp, my personal and favorite lawyer, was all excited about the 8-year-old divorce papers with no expiration date. He was like a kid in a candy store and could not wait to get started. Rebecca had not asked for percentages of anything but for hard figures. She wanted $14,000 from the checking and savings accounts. That was about half of the total 8 years ago, but next to nothing today. All the other items were similar. There was only one gotcha. She wanted the 1995 Volvo station wagon that she had at the time. I sold it about 5 years ago. I had to find that car. Carol Anderson started work in the software testing division of the company. It was an entry-level job, but I felt she would be comfortable with it. It also gave me a chance to see her on a regular basis. I liked Carol and hoped to get to know her better. Rachel and I kept our DNA tests secret from Rebecca. It would be a few weeks until the results came back, but Seymour needed the time to make sure there were no loopholes in the divorce papers. I felt confident that the results would show Rachel was mine. With a little bit of help from friends at the DMV, I was able to locate the Volvo wagon at State College. The frat boy was happy to let me have it at twice what he paid for it. A week later, I had the new title with Rebecca's name on it. Seymour explained to me that as long as nothing was changed on the original request for divorce, it could go through as written. We were not able to find anything serious enough to make us want to change it. Rebecca's signature was notarized and still legal even after 8 years. I signed in my place and Seymour's notary put the seal on it. Now all we had to do was wait. Time passed very slowly. My relationship with my wife did not improve. My relationship with my daughter grew stronger every day. My relationship with Carol Anderson grew stronger every day. After about a month, I convinced Carol to have lunch with me on a non-working day. It was pleasant, with no strings attached, and I assured her that I would do nothing that would indicate to the other employees that I was interested in her. She replied that her relationship with me was more important than her job. I had a feeling that things would improve, but I was not going to rush anything. Over the next few weeks, I tried several times to talk to Rebecca about our marriage. She refused to open any discussions or even respond to questions. I did not tell her that her petition for divorce from me was being processed, and in a short time, she would be notified that it was final. It was the middle of the week and the middle of the day when my loving wife, Rebecca, came storming into the office. "What the hell is this?" she demanded as she threw some official-looking papers on my desk. "I am not sure, but I believe the divorce request that you made 8 years ago has just been finalized." "You a-hole. You can't do that. Everything has changed since then, and if you think I am going to let you get away with this crap, you are crazy." "What has changed, dear? Just because your lover died doesn't mean we could not proceed with the divorce. I agreed to all of your terms, so you have no grounds to protest. I suggest you get a lawyer if you want to contest the divorce, and in the meantime, I would like you to get all your things out of my house, which you gave to me." "I will gladly get out of your house, and I will get this piece of shit divorce notice thrown out. You will pay, and you will pay big. Rachel and I will be gone this afternoon, and I will send somebody for my stuff tomorrow." "Sorry, dear, but if you read paragraph 7, you will notice that you gave full custody of Rachel to me. Until you get it resolved, she is mine. If you try and take Rachel without my permission, I will have you arrested, I promise." By this time, Rebecca was boiling mad. All of her words were not spoken but screamed. Her neck muscles were tense and the veins in her forehead were popping. Her lips quivered every time she talked. For the next minute, I didn't hear what she was saying. I just stood there stunned by her rampage. Finally, she grabbed the papers and stormed out. The peace and quiet was wonderful. I sat fully relaxed and relieved as my secretary brought me a cup of coffee. She didn't say anything, just smiled. I spent the rest of the afternoon canceling cell phones, credit cards, bank accounts, and insurance policies. I called Carol, and she agreed to have supper with Rachel and me that night. I needed a friendly shoulder to lean on. Rachel and Carol spent most of the night talking to each other. Things didn't work out as I had planned. Seymour called me a few days later. Rebecca had retained legal counsel, and a meeting was set up to settle and resolve the problems with the divorce. A family judge was going to sit in on the proceedings and act as arbitrator. Seymour indicated that Rebecca's lawyer did not seem to have much confidence in getting the divorce decree thrown out, but seemed more interested in getting me to relinquish custody of Rachel as an addendum. I agreed to compromise but not concede. The meeting started off slow and consisted mainly of reviewing each of the demands that Rebecca had made in the divorce request. Seymour handed over checks for the agreed-upon amounts, and we sat quietly and endured the formal protests relating to the unfairness of the settlements. Seymour gave no responses whatsoever. Rebecca seemed shocked when I slid the car keys and title for the Volvo across the table. At last, the question of custody was reached. Rebecca asked the judge if she could make a statement, which was approved. For the last 8 years, I have forced myself to live in a loveless marriage for the sake of my daughter. I loved Jason Anderson with all my heart, and I was proud to give him the child that his wife was unable to. Jason Anderson is the father of my daughter, not Kevin Smith. Mr. Smith has no rights whatsoever to Rachel, and I will not tolerate having the daughter of the man I loved raised by a stranger. I am seeking sole custody of Rachel Smith based on this. The judge, who had been quiet during the entire proceeding, spoke up. "Mrs. Smith, are you saying that Rachel Smith is the offspring of an adulterous relationship that you had with Jason Anderson while you were married to Kevin Smith?" "Yes, Your Honor." "It sounds a little degrading the way you put it, but Jason Anderson and I were lovers and soulmates. We never felt like we were doing anything as dirty as adultery. We were planning or starting our own life together when his tragedy occurred. Rachel is the proof of our love, and I don't want Mr. Smith having contact with her in any fashion. Your revelation concerning this matter would in most cases make you less likely to get custody due to the infidelity. If what you say is true, however, we might possibly have to reconsider." The judge looked over to Seymour. "Do you have anything to offer?" Seymour and I sat and looked at each other. "Are you sure you want to do this, Kevin?" "Yes. Let's do it." My friendly lawyer pushed a piece of paper across the table to Rebecca's lawyer. This is a report made approximately 6 weeks prior to the conception date of Rachel Smith. As you can see, the report indicates that Jason Anderson had a sperm count of 0. Mr. Anderson was completely sterile, and there is no way he could ever father a child. That is the reason Carol Anderson, who is fertile, was never able to conceive. Rebecca went pale and her eyes opened wide. She was getting agitated again as she did in my office. That's a lie. That report is not authentic. This is something that you are making up just to steal Jason's child away from me. Her lawyer whispered something in her ear as he tried to calm her down. Finally, she seemed to relax a little bit. Seymour pushed 3 more pieces of paper across the table. The first form is a DNA analysis of Rachel Smith. The second form is a DNA analysis of Kevin Smith. The third report is a comparison of the two, which shows that Kevin Smith is without a doubt the father of Rachel Smith. Are there any questions? By this time, Rebecca was in tears. She wasn't mad anymore. Now she was simply crushed. She was bawling uncontrollably as her lawyer asked for a short break. After the break, my ex-wife's lawyer conceded custody, but asked for some type of visitation agreement. I agreed to let Rebecca have Rachel every other weekend and 2 holidays a year of her choice. Rebecca decided that she would like to have Rachel on Christmas and on her birthday. Rebecca sat quietly the rest of the session. I went back to work without saying anything to her and left Seymour to finalize the paperwork. I could not believe that I got off that cheap. If Rebecca had been a better companion the least few years, I would have been willing to share the wealth. I never denied her anything, emotionally or materially. I was willing and able to do anything for her, but somehow, some way I had not met her expectations as a partner. I never was able to figure out what Jason Anderson had that I didn't, or what he did for her that I could not. The pictures that Carol left did not show him to be anything special in the physical department. I gave copies of the pictures and the investigation to Rebecca. Inside the investigation were 2 reports of motel meetings that Jason had with other women at the same time he was seeing Rebecca. I hope she enjoyed reading that. Every attempt I ever made to get an explanation from Rebecca was rebuffed. The divorce left me feeling like a failure. I found a little consolation with Rachel and Carol. Rebecca moved in with Jason's mother, Rachel. Apparently, they had become friends over the last few years. Unfortunately, the arrangement did not work out well for Rebecca. In order to support herself, my ex-wife was slowly selling off the jewelry and designer clothes that she had accumulated at my expense. It took a while for her to realize that her lover's mother was doing the same thing. After 6 months, Rebecca moved out and went to live with her sister in Norristown. At first, Rebecca picked up Rachel every weekend. But soon, she started calling with excuses for why she couldn't make it. The calls became more frequent, and the reasons got weaker until, eventually, she just stopped coming altogether. Rachel didn't seem to mind much when her mother canceled. Carol and I always went out of our way to make it up to her. We spent more time together, and were really starting to feel like a family. Carol moved in with us, and just before Christmas, we got married. Rebecca was on a singles cruise in the Caribbean over the holidays, which meant she couldn't pick up Rachel as planned. That arrangement suited everyone. 2 weeks later, I filed to have the custody addendum thrown out, and it was approved. Around that time, my company was finally purchased, bringing us a substantial windfall. Carol was thrilled, not just because of our financial situation, but also because she was pregnant for the first time in her life. Sure, we'll probably be on Social Security by the time our child finishes high school, but it will all be worth it. Life, at last, is good. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Detective Albert Fisher couldn't believe his luck. After 3 days of tramping through a deep, dense forest, he finally found his quarry. He was plodding up another endless hill and getting tired of fighting his way through tangled bush while contending with hordes of mosquitoes and bugs when he spotted something out of the ordinary. A flash of color or a sudden movement. He wasn't sure which, but something caught his eye. He focused his attention on it. Yes, definitely something down there, but wild animal or human. He wasn't sure, so he continued to study for a moment. He suddenly realized he was on a crest of a hill and therefore perfectly silhouetted, a perfect target for his quarry if indeed it was human. Instinctively, he dropped to the ground, crawled up behind some bushes which he hoped would give him some cover. Then he peered intently down the hill for a few minutes before making his decision. It was him all right. Timothy Lee, the object of the 3-day manhunt. It was reported that he kidnapped his wife and fled into the mountainous wilderness near Edson, Alberta. The search for him had come to involve dozens of policemen and civilian searchers. Now, Fisher thought, I think we finally got him. Still staying crouched behind the bushes, Fisher could hear the searchers coming up behind him. Earlier, they had formed a line about 25 yards apart, so Lee couldn't slip through them. However, the rugged terrain, along with tangled bush and occasional ponds, had soon thrown that plan to hell. Some, like himself, had managed to forge almost straight ahead, while others had fought their way through various impediments until the straight, well-managed line had totally disintegrated. Nevertheless, they were still coming and making a hell of a lot of noise in the process. Fisher realized if Lee hadn't become aware of their presence yet, he would have to be blind, deaf, and dumb. Fisher whispered softly into his mic to contact the search coordinator, Ryan Volkov. Found him, he informed the police captain. Tell the searchers to stand down or something, will you? He suggested. I don't think Lee is completely aware of us, yet so there is still a chance we can take him by surprise and end this peacefully. Like hell, came the response from Volkov, making Fisher wince. Same old captain, a good man, but as gung-ho as all hell, with the philosophy of aggression and brute force being the only way to subdue a suspect. Scare the hell out of them. Show them who's boss and that we're not going to back down, especially when it comes to kidnappers. That was Volkov's idea of diplomacy. Where he is? Volkov demanded. I need to have my men surrounding him right now to make sure the sucker doesn't escape us. Fisher sighed in frustration, arguing he realized was useless. Volkov was in command, and Lee probably posed at least some danger. There was no denying that, but still he had hoped for at least a chance to get Lee out of this mess alive. In a valley about 100 yards straight ahead, good hiding place he's found himself. He's deep in some bushes with lots of open space between him and us, so he'll be able to spot us the moment we make a move on him. Fisher cursed at the captain's response. No problem. We surround him and find a place for the snipers to get a good beat on him, and then he either surrenders immediately or else. Fisher's reply was interrupted by someone crawling up behind him. He turned his head and saw that a policewoman named Kathy Robinson was wriggling her way toward him. Any sign of the woman? She asked when she reached him. Fisher blinked at the question and then cursed himself for being so stupid. The woman, of course, Maria Lee, the whole object of this search. Where the hell was she? He and the captain had been so occupied with the fate of Timothy Lee, they had completely forgotten about her. The woman, Robinson demanded. You see her down there? Then, with a knowing smirk, added men, so full of testosterone, they fight and argue among themselves and lose sight of the most important things. She pulled a pair of binoculars from a bag around her waist and turned her attention to the spot where Lee had been seen. Anyways, there he is. That's Timothy, all right, she exclaimed, but where is Maria? Hope he didn't ditch her or already kill her. Fisher watched as she refocused the binoculars and began a sweep of the area around Timothy. Think I spotted her, she said after a moment's search. Where? Asked Fisher. Something about 25 yards from Timothy, about 3 o'clock. Lying in some bushes, shape of a body, so it's probably her, but she doesn't appear to be moving much. Hope she's still okay. Fisher nodded and said, may I? He grabbed the binoculars and focused them on the spot Robinson had pointed out. Sure enough, body down there, and there is some movement, so maybe she is still okay. He handed the glasses back to Robinson and told her, keep an eye on them, I gotta talk to the captain again. Fisher, what the hell's happening? The captain hissed. The woman Robinson found her, spotted her with binoculars. He explained as Robinson glanced sideways at him, with a frown on her face. Good, Volkov replied. Now that we know where she is, we take Timothy quickly, one way or the other, before he can do anything else to her. Let's wrap this up and go home. In the valley below, Maria Lee lay prone among some dense bushes. She had heard the approach of the searchers and knew her ordeal would soon be over. However, it wasn't the couple of days' march through the bush that she was referring to. It was all the shit and abuse she had been forced to put up with since her marriage to Timothy. At first, she had been captivated by his bad boy image, and it seemed exciting to be around him, but that wore about as fast as the honeymoon fantasy did. Timothy, she quickly discovered, was a narcissistic son of a bitch who cared only about himself, and in addition, had no qualms about heaping all kinds of physical and emotional abuse on her. Over several years, her friends first noticed the change in her demeanor due to the emotional abuse. Then they saw the more telltale signs of outright physical abuse. Maria had made several complaints to the police, but the results were less than satisfactory. All Timothy got was a warning to behave himself. Finally, she had not only divorced Timothy, but got a restraining order against him. However, the order meant nothing to him, and he broke it on a regular basis without much repercussion from the law. It was only after enduring this for a couple more years that Maria and a couple of girlfriends devised a plan to put an end to the Timothy problem, permanently. They had set the first part of the plan in motion Friday afternoon by renting a lake shore cabin for the long weekend. Normally, Maria went to great lengths to hide her whereabouts from Timothy in order to avoid another confrontation with him. However, this time she made no attempt to hide from him, so she knew Timothy was bound to show up, and he didn't disappoint her. The rest was easy, but the most risky part of the plan, especially for Maria. The women plied the unsuspecting Timothy with booze laced with drugs, then alternately cajoled, threatened, acted friendly and angry to him, until he became a befuddled creature that finally snapped. While the girlfriends fled in panic to alert the authorities about a kidnapping, Maria remained behind, so she could feed Timothy more of the doctored booze, which made him extremely pliable and easy to manipulate. She talked him into a walk in woods to calm down, and the rest, as they say, was history. For the next couple of days, she continued to ply Timothy with the booze and drugs and lead him around in circles through the dense bush until the police found them. As for Timothy, drunk and stoned as he was, he could hear the approach of the posse, and he vaguely sensed that something wasn't quite right. He could feel the danger, but thoughts of Maria kept running through his addled mind. The last few days she had actually seemed to love him again, and even though she was not anywhere near him right now, he could still feel the warmth of her body and hear her words ringing in his ears. "Don't let them take me, Timothy. Please, don't let them take me." Maria had repeated the words so often. His booze and drug-filled brain now actually believed that she was in danger, and he was going to do his best to protect her. He stumbled around in a doped-up trance, aiming a shotgun at the intruders. He couldn't see them, but he could hear them coming, and they seemed to be all around him. They had come to take Maria from him, and nothing was going to stand between them again. "You see that, Fisher?" came a whispered question from his mic. It was Volkov again. "The son of a bitch has got a gun, and he's waving it around like he intends to use it. My men are almost in position, and we're going to take him down in a moment." Fisher looked over at Robinson, who was still peering through the binoculars. "Yeah, he's got a gun all right. Victim is still lying in the bushes about 20 yards away. She hasn't moved at all, so Volkov's crew can probably take the suspect without a problem." She heard Fisher swear. "Where the hell did he get that from?" She replied, "I don't know, but a gun makes a huge difference. If we don't take him now, there's no telling what he'll do with it." Kaboom! Kaboom! Robinson's explanation was suddenly interrupted by the sound of the shotgun firing. Both she and Fisher pushed themselves face first into the dirt as the first shot threw up clumps of grass and bushes several yards in front of them. The next one was higher, but fortunately too high. The shotgun pellets went into the trunk of a tree they were hiding under, making leaves, bark, and branches rain down on them. Before they could even gather their wits together, there came the sounds of return gunfire from Volkov's men. Fisher raised his head just in time to see Timothy go down. For a moment, Timothy looked as if he was performing some kind of hip-hop dance as the bullets tore into him. The force of them coming from all directions practically turning him around in a circle before he fell motionless to the ground. Then there was complete pandemonium as the posse suddenly rose from their positions and began to race down the hill and across the open space. Some were headed straight to where Maria had been spotted, while others raced toward the freshly fallen Timothy. Fisher and Robinson were a little slow off the mark, so they were the last to arrive. Fisher went immediately to where Volkov and his men stood in a circle, staring down at the lifeless body of Timothy, while Robinson headed towards the victim. After Fisher studied the bullet-ridden body of Timothy, he looked up at Volkov, who was standing at his head with a big grin on his face. Dressed from head to toe in camouflage clothing, he looked like a big game hunter who had just bagged the ultimate trophy. Fisher wasn't so sure. Maybe it was because he didn't like to see anybody getting senselessly killed. Maybe it was because he still thought that if he'd had a chance to talk to Timothy, then maybe things might have been different. "Looks like we're done here. The son of the bitch led us on quite a chase, but we got him," Volkov was announcing to the press, which had closed in and began snapping pictures. Fisher shook his head and moved out of the circus. He made his way over to where Robinson and several other policemen were helping the victim towards a 4x4 Jeep. They wanted to get her to the hospital as quick as possible, but the terrain proved too difficult for an ordinary vehicle, so the 4x4 would take her to the ambulance, which was waiting on the road at the edge of the forest. "She hurt bad. Timothy do anything to her?" Fisher asked Robinson after she had finished helping Maria onto the open tail gate of the Jeep, where a couple of medical attendants began fussing over her. "No, her injuries look superficial, mainly from being dragged through the bush for 3 days. You know, the usual scratches, bumps, and bruises. That, plus dehydration and lack of food. He didn't beat her up or sexually assault her, but she's very emotionally distraught. She claims Timothy kept wanting to reconcile their marriage, and when she disagreed, he threatened to kill her and then kill himself. Sounds like the usual bullshit. If I can't have you, then nobody can. Since there wasn't anybody around to dispute Robinson's observation, it became the official version of the event. Fisher nodded and looked over at the Jeep where Maria sat on the tailgate, surrounded by the medics. He thought Robinson was probably right. The woman looked none the worse for wear for her ordeal. One medic was busy combing grass and leaves out of her hair and tending to a couple of scratches on her sunburnt face, while the other was dabbing ointment and applying bandages to cuts and bruises on her arms and legs. Back in town, most of the search crew crowded into a bar to tell and retell their stories about the search for Timothy over a bunch of beer. However, both Robinson and Fisher begged off. Robinson said she was anxious to get home to her kids after not seeing them for 3 days, while Fisher said he wanted to get started on the report while it was still fresh in his mind. After dropping Robinson off at her car, Fisher drove to his place, stripped off his clothes, took a long, hot shower, then shaved off his 3-day growth of beard and changed into a clean pair of khaki trousers and polo shirt. On one hand, he was happy that the whole thing had ended with Maria being found relatively unscathed. On the other hand, he had his doubts. Something kept bothering him. The whole thing seemed too pat, with the fate of Timothy already decided in advance, as if his death was preordained and nobody gave a care. After all, he was a no-good son of a bitch, and everybody was happy to see him get what he deserved. That was the problem. Maria, the much-abused ex-wife, made the perfect victim and the abusive son of a bitch. Timothy made the perfect villain. His going down in a hail of bullets was also the perfect ending, because it satisfied everybody and left only the victim's statement for the police to go on with nothing to corroborate it. Maybe he was just being a cynic, but detectives got paid for being cynics, and after some of the things he had seen during his years as a policeman, he believed humans were capable of doing almost anything. First thing in the morning, he would do a little more investigation before he wrote his report. In the meantime, he was hungry. Fisher looked in his fridge and didn't like what he saw. Most of the stuff seemed to be several weeks old and didn't look in the least appetizing, so he got in his car and headed to his favorite place, Armstrong's. It was owned by a red-headed Irishman, and it boasted an original Irish stew on its menu. The owner claimed it was from a family recipe handed down for generations. Fisher didn't know whether or not it was true. He only knew he liked it so much that the stew, along with several thick crusts of bread washed down with Irish beer, were almost a daily fare for him. Usually Fisher had his stew and a couple of beer, then left, but tonight was different, mainly because he got tied up at the pool table with some young hot shot who challenged him to a game which he almost won. The youngster kept buying him beer, while urging him to play game after game, and then taking his money because he never seemed to be able to beat the kid. No matter how close the game looked, the kid always seemed to pull some unbelievable shot. As a result, Fisher awoke the next morning at home with almost no idea how he got there. His head pounded, and his stomach kept threatening to divulge itself of the Irish stew, but somehow he managed to get himself mobile. Still, it took several minutes under the shower before he was able to rouse himself enough to get his clothes on and head out the door. Then he realized his car wasn't parked in its usual spot. He found it after taking a cab back to Armstrong's, and then he headed downtown with several things on his mind. The number one thing was a little more investigation into the untimely death of Timothy. The other was ability of one person being able to con another so good that even when the person being conned saw it coming. He never really saw it coming. Too many con men and too many hustlers in this world, Fisher mused. He mentally tallied up the amount of money he had lost last night. Shit, the kid took me for a couple of hundred and I fell right into it and kept coming back for more. As Fisher pulled into a parking lot at the police station, he kept wondering if Maria Lee was also pulling a con. Christ, you look like shit this morning. Too much partying last night, Sherry Anderson, the secretary, teased him as he passed her desk. Sherry was a 30-ish, tall, slender brunette with a very pretty face. She was always friendly to him, and Fisher thought she might have a crush on him. He kept promising himself that one day he was going to see if his premonition was right, but he had never gotten around it. Feel like it too, he replied. Only I don't know which is worse, the hangover or the fact that some hotshot pool players sucked me out of a couple $100 last night. The kid was so good that I never saw it coming, even though I told myself to be careful. This guy might be a hustler. Sherry laughed and replied, "Oh yeah, sucker born every minute. Isn't that how it goes?" She pulled out a desk drawer and grabbed a bottle of aspirin. "Here, have a couple of these," she said as she shook a few tablets into his offered hand. "Maybe the next time you decide to have a night on the town, you should do it with somebody who plays a whole lot nicer," she added as she gave him a wink and a big smile. Ordinarily, Fisher might have flirted right back at her, but this morning he just wasn't in the mood for it. Later, he promised himself as he made his way to his cubicle and grabbed yesterday's reports. He scanned through them quickly, and it was just as he suspected. The police involved in the pursuit and death of Timothy Lee all came to the same conclusion. They had successfully tracked down and killed the man who had kidnapped and threatened to kill his ex-wife. Fisher realized his report wouldn't be much different unless he could find some discrepancy somewhere. He threw the aspirins into his mouth and washed them down with a cup of hot, black coffee. Maybe the aspirins did help, or it could be the hot coffee. Fisher wasn't sure which, but he definitely felt a bit better. He left the police station and headed over to the coroner's office. Fisher sipped on another hot coffee and munched on a donut while reading the coroner's report. Same as everybody else's, he saw. Timothy died from numerous gunshot wounds to the torso and head, and it was too difficult to say which one actually did him in. In total, there were 6 shots that hit him, coroner Dr. Alexander Novikov explained, and anyone could have been fatal. What about drugs and booze? From what I saw, Timothy sure acted like he was so stoned and drunk that he probably didn't even realize what he was doing. Yeah, lots of booze in his system, both whiskey and vodka, and enough drugs to kill a horse. He was so full of uppers, downers, and in-betweeners, it's a wonder he was still on his feet, let alone be able to fire a shotgun at you. I hear he came close to hitting you and Robinson, the coroner replied. Lucky shot to be even close. Fisher shrugged it off. Timothy was so stoned and drunk he couldn't have hit the side of a barn door. Now for the million-dollar question, Fisher thought as he posed his question to the coroner. That much drugs and booze. Is it normal for somebody intent on kidnapping a woman to take so much of that stuff it makes him practically unable to function? Kind of defeats the purpose of the whole thing, doesn't it? I mean, wouldn't a normal person want to be able to keep his wits about him, so he'd be able to evade the police and avoid being killed? The coroner was silent for a moment as she pondered Fisher's question. Then she replied, Yeah, I see your point, but you're talking normal person when a kidnapper is anything but normal. Who knows what's going through a person's mind when he kidnaps somebody, especially somebody who he believes still loves him. The poor guy was probably total delusional to begin with, and the drugs and booze just make it worse. In the end, he probably felt that since he's going to end it all anyway, what better way to go than a shootout with the cops? What? Suicide by police? Fisher asked, and the coroner nodded in agreement. You gotta understand, Fisher, that these guys are probably nutcases from the get-go, and then they just snap. From then on, everything makes perfect sense to them. By the time Fisher left the coroner's office, he was convinced that the death of Timothy was going to be ruled what everybody wanted it to be. Death by police after he refused to surrender his kidnapped victim and surrender to the police. The blast from the shotgun made it even more believable that the police had no choice but to shoot him. Fisher knew he had one chance left to get to the bottom of everything, and that was to confront the victim herself and see what she had to say about the ordeal. It was a long shot, but Fisher felt he had to take it. He phoned Maria Lee's at her house, and she gave him her address. Fisher had no trouble finding the place. It was a trendy apartment-style condo, and of course there was no place to park near it, so he stuck his official police business sticker on the dashboard and parked in a no-parking zone. Maria buzzed him in immediately, and he took the elevator up to her third-floor apartment. Fisher paused at her door before knocking, because he could hear voices which meant she had company. It was a disappointment, because he was hoping to find her alone, but he decided to confront her whether or not she had visitors. Come on in, the door's open. A female voice hollered in response to his knock, and Fisher entered the apartment. It had an open-concept design, with a kitchen nook immediately to the left, and a living room straight ahead where Maria sat on a sofa in the company of 2 female friends. Why, detective? So nice for you to join us. You care for something? Maria asked as from her position on the sofa. Sorry I can't get up, but my leg is bothering me. She was stretched out with her feet on a hassock, one of which bore a couple of bandages. There were also some small scratches on her sun-burnt face. Fisher's immediate thought was that she was recovering pretty damned quick from her 3-day forced march through the forest. Meet my friends Susan and Sylvia. They have been so wonderful in helping me get over my ordeal. This morning, they decided to come over and keep me company since I'm a shut-in. The doctor says to stay off my foot for a couple of days. After last night, Fisher's stomach felt a bit queasy at just the smell of the liquor. Maria waved under his nose, but then it really didn't matter. He was here on business, not pleasure, and there was no way he was going to drink with her, especially with the suspicions he had about her and her friends. He merely nodded at the women before turning his attention back to Maria. Why, Ms. Lee, I sure am glad to see you recovered so quickly from your ordeal, Fisher replied with a hint of sarcasm in his voice. He didn't show any sympathy for her, and he wanted it that way to try and make her feel intimidated enough to foolishly say something she hadn't intended to. Oh, I thought you realized I wasn't that seriously injured, at least physically, but emotionally that's a whole different story. The doctors say I was so emotionally abused that it may take some time before I'm okay, and right now I feel as if I can never trust another man again. After all, the son of a bitch did threaten to kill me, you know? Fisher saw her girlfriends nodding in sympathy and decided to pull no punches because he felt he had nothing to lose and it was one last chance with everything into the pot. Oh yeah, I understand. Timothy did abuse you. He threatened to kill you, all right, and he was probably a real son of a bitch. We can all agree on that. But the question I have is, did you have to set him up to be killed? Wasn't there some other way to end this? Fisher knew he had lost when Maria was able to look right back at him, without even so much as blinking. The woman had balls, that's for such, he concluded. Maria just took another sip of her drink and replied, "What I don't understand, detective, is why you are still investigating this case at all. Did you know that Captain Volkov told me it's closed as far as he's concerned? Isn't it just great that I don't have to worry about Timothy anymore? That's because it's not really closed as far as I'm concerned. You see, I think the case isn't completely airtight because there's still a few things missing, and that leaves it with a few gaps. You understand what that means? It means that I'll watching you and your friend for a while yet, so you'd better not slip up on anything or I'll be there to pounce on you." Maria sipped her drink again and smiled at Fisher. "Thanks for the warning, detective, but haven't you heard the saying about the wisdom of having gaps in airtight things?" Fisher was ready to leave, but he delayed his departure a moment, waiting for the answer. "The gaps are good because they let a little sunshine in." Fisher turned to leave, ignoring the gales of laughter from the women. He now was only sure of one thing. God help the next man who pissed one of those women off. 3 months later, the case was closed. Timothy, being the unfortunate victim here, was the culprit. Detective Fisher knew how he was killed, but after checking the entire timelines, decided to bury the case. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to my channel. Support our channel by subscribing. Your subscription helps us grow and create more intriguing content like this. Now let's dive into today's story. Emma Carter. A 32-year-old successful lawyer at a prestigious firm. Emma is confident, ambitious, and always well put together. Her career has been everything to her, and she's worked tirelessly to maintain a perfect image. But beneath her polished facade, Emma harbors a dark secret, a passionate affair that threatens to destroy her seemingly perfect life. James Carter. A 34-year-old college professor, intelligent and reserved, James has always been the rock of the family. He met Emma in college, where they fell in love quickly. Although he is supportive of Emma's career, he is beginning to sense a growing distance in their marriage. He can't shake the feeling that something is wrong, but he hasn't figured out what yet. His world is about to come crashing down when he uncovers the truth. Lucas Evans. A 28-year-old real estate mogul, Lucas is charming, confident, and has a knack for making women feel special. He meets Emma through work when she's tasked with handling the legal aspects of his new development project. What begins as a professional relationship quickly turns into something more. Lucas is aware that Emma is married, but he has no intention of letting that stop him from getting what he wants. It had been a long week for James. He sat in his study, papers scattered across the desk as he tried to focus on his work. He had been feeling a strange distance from Emma lately. Her late nights at work were becoming more frequent, and her once lively conversations had turned into one-word responses. They had drifted apart, and James couldn't help but feel like an outsider in his own home. He had noticed the little things, the way she would disappear into the bathroom after work, taking an unusually long time to get ready, or how she would insist on staying late at the office when he knew her colleagues had already gone home. But it wasn't just that. There was a coldness in her eyes, a detachment that made him uncomfortable, and it gnawed at him, that feeling deep in his gut that something was wrong. But what? James tried to shake off the unease. He was overthinking. He loved Emma. They had built a life together, hadn't they? Yet that gnawing feeling remained. One evening, James arrived home earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Emma with dinner. But when he walked into the living room, he froze. Emma's phone was lying face down on the coffee table. The sound of a new text notification rang through the air, followed by a buzzing vibration. His eyes flickered to the phone. Emma had always been protective of her privacy, but there was something different about this moment. Something that told him he couldn't ignore it any longer. He walked toward the table, picked up the phone, and unlocked it. It wasn't a text from work. It was a message from Lucas. "Can't wait to see you tonight, beautiful. I'll be thinking about you all day." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His vision blurred for a moment as he fought to control his breathing. His worst fear had just come to life. Emma, the woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with his heart, was cheating on him. He put the phone back down and stepped away, his mind racing. But it wasn't just betrayal. It was the sense of being completely blindsided. How long had this been going on? Was he blind to it all along? That night, James couldn't sleep. The phone sat on the table, taunting him. Emma's absence loomed large as she was still out at a late dinner with colleagues. It wasn't the first time, but this time felt different. When she finally returned, James was waiting for her in the living room. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She smiled at him, but the smile was forced, the way it always was when she was hiding something. "Hey," Emma greeted, dropping her purse on the table. "Emma, James said, his voice low and steady. "We need to talk." She froze, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "About what?" James didn't waste time. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up her phone. "This," he said, his voice trembling with restrained anger as he showed her the message. Emma's face went pale. Her eyes flickered to the phone, then back to him. "James, How long, Emma?" he demanded, his voice breaking through the tension. "How long has this been going on?" Emma's eyes welled up with tears, and she took a step back, shaking her head. "I never meant for this to happen. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" James echoed bitterly. "You've been sleeping with him for months and you call it a mistake?" "I didn't know what I was doing," she whispered, her voice full of guilt. "I was lost, James. You've been so distant. I thought I needed someone else to feel alive again." James was shaking now. "Hi, you couldn't talk to me." "I tried," she said, her voice small. "But you were always so wrapped up in your work. I felt alone." James stood motionless, staring at her. His heart was breaking, but his mind was clear now. She had betrayed him, and he couldn't just let it go. Not now, not after everything they had been through together. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you, Emma," he said coldly, "but I'm going to make you feel what I'm feeling right now." The next day, James didn't go to work. He stayed home, alone with his thoughts, plotting. He knew revenge wasn't going to be easy, but he had to make her understand the pain she had caused him. He thought about the affair, about Lucas, about everything Emma had lied to him about. The rage inside him began to grow, but instead of lashing out, he took a deep breath. He would make her pay, but he would do it on his terms. James spent the entire day gathering information. He tracked down Lucas's social media accounts, his business dealings, and even his background. It wasn't hard. He had worked in academia long enough to know how to dig into people's lives. And Lucas had made one critical mistake. He had underestimated James's ability to gather intel. By the evening, James had everything he needed. The following weekend, Emma and Lucas planned to meet at a local art gallery. Emma thought it would be a romantic outing, a way to reconnect. What she didn't know was that James was watching them, quietly, from the shadows. He had set everything in motion. The plan was simple but effective. He had reached out to the gallery's management and arranged for a private viewing, one that would include a surprise for Emma and Lucas. As they strolled through the gallery, admiring the pieces, Emma was completely unaware of James's presence. But as they entered a secluded room, the lights suddenly dimmed. A spotlight flickered on, revealing a massive screen on the wall. Emma turned to Lucas, confused. "What's going on?" Without warning, a video began to play. It was a recording of their affair. Every intimate moment, every lie, every secret they had shared was now exposed in front of her. James had arranged for a hidden camera to capture their meetings, their whispered words, their stolen kisses. Emma's face drained of color as she watched, horrified. Lucas looked around, panicking, but he was trapped. There was no escape. The video ended and the lights flickered back on. James stepped into the room, his face calm, but his eyes filled with a quiet fury. "Did you enjoy the show, Emma?" he asked, his voice icy. "How does it feel to see your own betrayal laid bare for everyone to see?" The days that followed were a blur. Emma was devastated, humiliated. She tried to apologize, tried to make things right, but the damage was done. The affair had torn apart everything they had built. James, on the other hand, found a strange sense of closure. He had exposed the truth, not for vengeance, but for himself. He needed to know that he wasn't the fool he had once believed himself to be. In the end, Emma left the house. The marriage was over, and though James's heart still ached with the loss of the woman he had once loved, he knew it was the only way forward. Thank you for watching. In Her Shoes. What do you think of James's plan for revenge? Was it justified, or did he take it too far? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories. Sometimes, the only way to move on is to expose the truth, and in that truth, we find our freedom. Double asterisk.
Actually calm, rushed into the room with an extremely worried look, prompting me to quickly wipe away my tears. Mom, what happened? Is it serious? You're not going to die, right? Of course not. I wouldn't leave my dear son alone. Ah, that's good. Really, I was called by the school teacher and told that you were taken to the hospital. I was so shocked, my heart nearly stopped. Arlo, usually mature for his age, but he's still only 10. I felt a strong resolve to get better for his sake. But my condition was worse than I thought, and I was diagnosed with a serious illness. The doctor advised, you should have surgery as soon as possible. Please make a decision quickly. Following the doctor's advice, I underwent surgery, and by the time I was discharged, it had been a month since Jacob had left. When I returned home and opened the mailbox, I found a demand letter for the car loan payment. Alice thought the repayment should have been automatically deducted from my account. In panic, I checked the account balance with my cash card, and the balance, originally $20,000, was now only $33.90. Alice thought, Jacob did this. I want to ask him to return the money, but I can't contact him. What should I do? Since I don't have the camper van, I can't sell it. After Jacob left, everything seemed to be going in a bad direction, and my mood sank deeper. Seeing me saddened by my series of misfortunes, Arlo put his hand on my forehead. You look pale. Are you feeling sick again? You don't seem to have a fever, though. I'm fine physically, but you see, your father not only took the car, but also all the money we had saved, but I can't work due to my physical condition, and now we have no money. I'm at a loss. I see. Then I'll deliver newspapers, and I'll search the internet to see if there's any work I can do. Encouraged by my 10-year-old son, I told myself that it wasn't the time to be down. Sorry for worrying you. I can't afford to be weak. I'll change my mindset and try to do whatever I can, I said, smiling at him. Arlo also smiled back and then said something unexpected. Let's plan how to get the car back from Dad. How can we do that? The camper van is in your name, right? Yes, but what about it? Then maybe we can. Arlo suggested an idea that I couldn't even imagine. I had never thought such an idea could exist. Also, I have no idea where your father is. Then let's check on my phone. A month ago, once when we went hiking as a family, surprisingly, Arlo, who is usually very reliable, felt lost. At that time, we bought a kid's cell phone on suggestion and installed the GPS app on it, which both Jacob and I could access. With this app, I can see where Dad is in real time, and he's been moving around a lot. Oh, is that so? But what if we find him, and he just says something vague and escapes again? As I pondered this, Arlo smiled and made an intriguing suggestion. Don't worry. I've already taken precautions. What did you just say? To my astonishment, Arlo had acted independently while I was in the hospital, achieving something unbelievable. I thought, I can't believe such a smart child came from me. Understanding Arlo's words, I was simply amazed. He had even caught wind of Jacob's mistress. All right, let's teach Dad, who betrayed us, a lesson. Okay, let's start the plan right away. Together, my son and I prepared for that moment. Alice thought, With Arlo by my side, I'm invincible. Bring it on, anywhere, anytime. 3 days later, my phone rang. Ah, it's me. Please, I need your help. Oh, who might this be? Don't play dumb. It's your husband, obviously. I'm being questioned by the police about you. At this rate, they might ask me to come to the police station voluntarily. Help me out. Oh, is that so? Just wait a moment. Then I immediately went with my son to where Jacob was, and to my surprise, it was a forest park near our house where camping was possible. Jacob was being questioned by the police in front of his car, looking bewildered, feeling pathetic. I sighed and told the police we needed to have a talk as a couple and asked them to leave for a while. At that time, Jacob seemed uncomfortable being watched by the people around us and urged Arlo and me to get into the car. Inside the car, Jacob's mistress was sitting cross-legged, glaring at us, but that was no longer important. Sorry about that. Thanks for coming, but why did the police suddenly show up at my place? I don't get it. That's because I filed a report about the missing camper van. What? Why would you do that? It's obvious, isn't it? My car was stolen. Jacob, foolishly thinking that actions between spouses can't be criminal, was saying nonsensical things, but the world isn't that naive, you know. You filed for divorce, remember? Forgot? So we are strangers now, and driving a stranger's car without permission, that's a crime. Arlo figured all this out, typical, sharp as ever. But I didn't steal the car. I just borrowed it for a bit. Oh, is that so? Well, I'd like to use my car now, so could you return it? That would be really helpful. As I reached out my hand asking Jacob to return the keys, he reluctantly handed them over. After confirming it was returned, Arlo quietly started talking. Hey, why did you abandon your family and choose to play around with this woman? Caught off guard by his son's unexpected question, Jacob was flustered and awkwardly scratched his head. Seeing this, Jacob's mistress chuckled smugly and started talking. It's because I'm more attractive than your mother. Look at me, you can see it, right? He fell head over heels for me and decided to leave his family. Quiet. I didn't ask you, old lady. Dad, you answer. Grace was silenced by Arlo's stern tone, but Jacob remained quiet. If you can't explain, that's fine. I'll just have the police come back and arrest you. Wait, hold on. Okay, I'll talk. Grace, it turns out, joined Jacob's company 3 months ago. They were attracted to each other and became involved at the welcome party for new employees. Later, it was discovered that Grace was pregnant, and Jacob decided to start a new life with her, leaving us behind. Why did you take the camper van? I quit my job and thought about selling the car for money. But it seems like you were using it quite a bit, weren't you? I thought it was a waste to sell it right away, so we decided to go on a trip. Wait, how do you know all this? Remember when Arlo got lost? After that, as a precaution, we bought him a kid's cell phone and installed the GPS app. Did you forget? We installed it on your phone too, so I knew where you were all this time. By the way, I later found out from Arlo that he had pretended to get lost during our family hike. Because he wanted a cell phone, I was amazed at Arlo's ability to think and act so strategically. I suspected something was off with Dad, so I came up with this plan to monitor his actions. You really are a terrifying child. I will never become an adult like you, Dad, who betrays important people without a second thought. Jacob, faced with the hard truth Arlo told, was a pitiful adult, unable to offer any rebuttal. In contrast, seeing Arlo, only 10 but able to think and speak his mind firmly, gave me a sense of strength. As a mother, I felt I couldn't lose, especially in settling things properly. Also, return the $20,000 you withdrew from my account right now. That was our joint property as a couple. I don't have to return it. No, it's not that. The money was what I saved little by little since I was single. After all, you always quit your jobs midway, so we hardly ever saved money together, did we? I was appalled to hear that the $20,000 had been squandered by Jacob and his mistress. It was the moment I felt relieved about divorcing him. So that's how it is. But if you stole and used the car and my money, that's going to be a serious crime. What? I just sent the police away, so it's not their business anymore, right? I only said we would talk. I have no intention of withdrawing the complaint. I must add the theft of my money to the report. Mom, should I call the police now? I can do it with just one button on my phone. Grace, Jacob's mistress, had been watching our conversation but quickly tried to get out of the camper van. At that moment, she let out a scream that echoed around. The reason was that outside the car door, Grace's parents were standing there, faces red with anger, about to explode in fury. Startled, she stepped back as her parents yelled at her. I'm sorry, don't be so angry. But why are you here, Mom and Dad? I called your parents beforehand. What? Why? The truth was, during my hospital stay, Arlo had visited Jacob's office and tearfully told them, my dad left the house with a woman we don't know, and my mom collapsed. Seeing Arlo's sorrowful and frail state, the people at Jacob's office suspected Grace, who had left the company with Jacob, and gave Arlo her parents' address. Jacob and Grace had been overly friendly at the office, and there were photos showing them together at the welcome party for new employees, looking like a couple. After learning from the office people that you commuted from your parents' house, Grace's parents were standing there, faces red with anger. I went there with your photo, and your parents came out when I visited. Then I told them everything that had happened. So today, I contacted Grace's parents and asked them to wait nearby for a while. How could you do this to me? The worst. I don't want to hear that from you. That's my line. By the way, your stomach seems quite big. When is the baby due? In 3 months. What? Wait a minute, that doesn't add up with when you met my husband. You two met only 3 months ago. What's going on? It's not time for the baby to be born yet. Jacob, hearing this for the first time, stared at Grace, eyes wide. Wait, what does that mean? Are you stupid? Don't you get it? It takes about 9 months from conception to birth, which means the child she's carrying isn't yours. You're so foolish. What do you mean, Grace? Have you been deceiving me? I almost got away with it. Can't help it now that I'm caught. You're so naive, you can't see through lies at all. Really, a fool. Don't mock me. My whole life is ruined because of you. What were you thinking? Grace and Jacob started an ugly argument, but nobody intervened, letting them have it out. Meanwhile, we contacted the police again to explain the situation. As it began to get dark, the forest park was brightly lit by the red lights of the police cars. No, really, I was wrong. I was truly wrong. I'm sorry. I'll work hard and never cheat again, so please just don't arrest me. Dad, people don't change that easily, especially lazy people like you. Exactly. Arlo's right. I can't trust you at all. Reflect on your actions and pay for your crimes at the police station. If I get arrested, I won't be able to pay back the money. Is that okay with you? I don't mind. Pay me back after you've atoned for your sins. Take your time. Don't worry, I've already found you a place to work. Let's see, there's Arlo's child support, plus the $220,000 you stole from me. I'm not sure how much it will all add up to, but you'll work and pay it all back. I had one last thing to say to Grace, the mistress. You might think you're just an onlooker, but don't forget, you're an accomplice to Jacob's theft. Be prepared for that. When I told them that Grace would have to pay if Jacob couldn't return the stolen money, she shivered in fear. Grace asked her parents for help, but they refused, saying, "We disown a daughter who causes trouble for others." Thus, Jacob and Grace were taken away in a police car together. Thanks to Arlo's smart strategy, we were able to punish Jacob and his mistress, Grace. Though they were released from detention soon after, they faced a hefty payment to me through a lawyer. I claimed $20,000 in damages. Additionally, I made Jacob agree to pay $500 a month in child support for Arlo. I introduced Jacob to a subcontracting factory of the company I work for. The support and other charges I claimed from Jacob would be deducted from his salary and paid into my account. I also sold the camper van and was freed from the auto loan. Since then, my health has improved remarkably and I am now energetic, committed to my job. Arlo has been actively helping with household chores and errands. I want to keep moving forward strongly so that Arlo can pursue the path he loves without giving up.
Do you believe any company would hire a child from a poor single mother? My goal was to work at the same bank where my father worked, and during the final interview, someone known as the demon instructor said that to me. It was clear this person looked down on me for being from a single mother household and had no intention of accepting me for the position. I desperately dealt with it, but the interview kept getting worse and worse. Finally reaching my limit, I took my goal out of my phone from my back and called my father. That's because my father is actually the bank's president. My name is Jessica Chastain. I'm a 23-year-old college senior looking for a job. My parents got divorced last year, so my mom is now a single mother. They both wanted to live their own lives, naturally. I stayed with my mom, but my future plans were influenced by my father. My father is the president of the bank, the chief executive officer. This bank is the largest in the country, and I aspired to be a bank employee because I admired my father for working there. And tomorrow, I have my final interview. Honestly, I'm not very good at studying. And when I said my goal was to work at the bank, my teachers and peers not only tried to stop me but also ridiculed me. I thought it would all end after the interview, but looking back, it was really awful. One day, during my college life, "Hey Jessica, have you decided where you're going to go after graduation?" Her name was Nancy. She's a friend I met in college. For me, it's just the one choice, the bank. I answered her question without hesitation. Then the people around us who had been listening to our conversation started to murmur. Did I say something strange? Just as I thought that, Nancy spoke up first. You know, Jessica, it's hard to say, but I think you should know your place. Huh? To my surprise, someone I thought was my friend was insulting me. As I tried to argue back in frustration, another guy approached me and said it's impossible for you. That place is the largest bank in the country, you know? It's the most difficult to get into from this university, with only one person getting a job from there in the past 10 years. I know that. Of course, I haven't told anyone around me that my father is the head of the bank I'm applying to. If I did, people would likely say I got through the back door considering my abilities. If that happened, I'd be causing trouble for my father, and it would be painful to feel like my skills aren't good enough. I didn't like being talked about, especially when it wasn't true. Jessica, I'm saying this for your own good. While I don't need your advice, as I looked around, everyone's eyes were on me, their cold stares pierced my heart. Why do I have to hear this? As I thought that, the teacher who had noticed the commotion came over. What's going on here? The boy from earlier answered, Chastain says she wants to work at North Trust Bank. At that, the teacher's face also tensed up, and then she said something unthinkable. Are you taking society for granted? Even the teacher, who was supposed to be on the student's side, denied my dream. There was no one there to stand up for me. Well, if I want to go there, what's wrong with that? Of course, I objected. But the teacher piled on more. You're naive. My father is an interviewer for North Trust Bank. They say he's a demon interviewer. The teacher's surname was Thomas, a 29-year-old woman, so if I encountered an interviewer with the same surname Thomas, it would likely be her father, a demon interviewer. You say? Yes, that's right. My father doesn't like new talent. He says it's good enough if he interviews 100 people and hires 2. That's what it was at the Sun Plaza branch. And you're from a single mother household, right? I wondered why she would ask that, but I honestly answered yes. Then the teacher showed his sinister smile. At that time, I had no way of knowing the reason for her smile. The argument ended with the bell signaling the start of class. But from that moment on, the way people looked at me grew colder. My friends, starting with Nancy whom I thought was my friend, and my classmates who attended classes with me, distanced themselves. For me, it was as if they didn't want to associate with a fool. Their reactions became worse with each exam I passed. The North Trust Bank exam process had 4 stages. The first stage was a written test, the second and third stages were interviews by people from the head office. In the fourth and final stage, interviews were conducted by the person in charge of hiring for the desired work area and the head office hiring manager. In other words, it was an interview with the highest-ranking hiring manager. By the way, I wanted to work at the bank at the Sun Plaza, and I had managed to pass the third stage. Why, how did you pass the third stage? Even those who had looked down on me were now surprised and anxious about my progress. That's because most of them had failed their desired company's second stage interviews. It had been 3 months since the job hunting season began. In my class alone, there were no confirmed hires. The atmosphere was filled with panic, envy, and jealousy. Perhaps I could be the first one to get a job offer. Those who had been so arrogant now ostracized me even more due to their pride. However, I got used to that life at university and decided to focus only on myself. My motivation was solely to get an offer from North Trust Bank. My mind was only on that. But then one day, Teacher Thomas started attacking me in front of everyone after class. "All right, everyone, listen up," the teacher shouted to everyone who was preparing to leave. At her voice, everyone turned around and stopped what they were doing. I also paid attention, wondering what was going on. And then the teacher started talking. "This time, Jessica Chastain has cleared the 3rd round of North Trust Bank's exams." The atmosphere around us suddenly became heavy. However, with the next statement, everyone around me seemed to catch their breath. "But it seems she'll fail the 4th round, huh?" "What do you mean?" I muttered involuntarily. Seeing my reaction, the teacher twisted her face into a sneer. "The reason is the interviewer for the 4th round has been decided to be my father, the demon instructor Thomas." Oh, the surroundings erupted in surprise and cheers. "Serves you right. Know your place. Good." The classroom was filled with voices condemning me in unison. I couldn't believe it. Everyone I thought were my friends turned their back on me during this job hunting process, even though I had done nothing wrong. Despite that, those around me harassed me and hurled abusive language at me. At first, I thought it might be a way to relieve stress. The stress from job hunting is immeasurable, so I wanted to think that they were just harassing me to relieve that stress. But it was different. I realized the situation around me. This was jealousy. They were envious of me challenging something they themselves wouldn't dare to. There's no way I could lose to someone like her who isn't even good at studying. There is no way someone like her could get into North Trust Bank. If she can make it, then so can I. If Chastain is going, I should have tried as well. But that place is difficult, it's the most challenging, it's impossible. So why is Chastain trying without hesitation? It's wrong. She's trying for a place that even I can't get into. I can't forgive that. It's strange, the reality that becomes apparent as job hunting progresses. Among those who pass, those who fail, and various others, no one here has much hope. I was being attacked because of jealousy. The final straw was the teacher's words and actions, as her father was in charge of hiring at North Trust Bank. If the teacher led the attack on me, the students overflowing with jealousy would just follow her. On that day, I finally couldn't take it anymore and stormed out of the room. When I returned home, my mother encouraged me gently. Wrapped in such warmth, I cried. I took a break from university for a while, and before I knew it, the day of the final interview had come. Don't forget, just do your best. I left the house after receiving words of encouragement from my mother. Upon arriving at the interview venue, I was guided to the waiting room. At first, there were nearly 300 applicants in the Sun Plaza area, but now only about 10 remained. Only 3 would survive from this group. My name was called just as I was about to close my eyes to concentrate. "Please come in." Hello, thank you. My final interview began. There were 3 people in the room. One was Thomas, the teacher's father, just as the teacher had said. The second was a man who appeared to be the chief hiring officer. He looked about 10 years younger than my father, a man in his 30s, presumably in charge of keeping records, faced a computer at a slight distance. The interview began with questions from Thomas, starting with the typical self-introduction. I was asked about my motivation for applying. I answered these questions without difficulty. I don't really like female bank employees, the complaints started suddenly. Not knowing what to say in response, I fell silent. Thomas continued, because they have quiet voices, are physically weak, and many think they can please people just by serving tea. I realized this man must be the type to mistreat his subordinates, and this would be a stressful interview from here on. Silence is taboo in an interview, so I racked my brain and tackled the situation. I was in a sports club, and I think I'm strong. I'll do my best with any job given to me. Just like a man, I tried to appeal and respond flexibly to his complaints. However, he didn't find it amusing and clicked his tongue, directing his gaze toward the papers in his hand. I felt something was off at this point. This interview was clearly going too far, yet the chief hiring officer, who should be higher ranking than Thomas, said nothing. Upon closer observation, the chief hiring officer looked younger than Thomas. Maybe Thomas is pressuring this person too, that's what I thought. However, there was nothing I could do about it. I could only sit quietly and endure the interview. After a brief silence, Thomas spoke again. It seemed he would be in charge of the entire interview. You seem to come from a single mother household, am I wrong? He was probably looking at the documents I submitted from university. They included my address and family composition. Yes, my parents divorced, and now I live with my mother. As soon as he heard my words, Thomas began to laugh, his sinister smile echoing through the room. I see you're from a single mother household. What business does a poor person have here? As soon as he heard my response, he blatantly changed his attitude. As the teacher's sinister smile crossed my mind, I became sweaty. I struggled to find the correct response and began to feel anxious. But it was Thomas who started talking first. Do you think there's a company that would hire someone from a poor single-parent family like you? He said that while mocking me. Just because I'm from a single-parent family, I won't be hired? You're going to assume I'm poor. I couldn't help but raise my tone. Of course, Thomas reacted to that. It was as if he had been waiting for me to fight back. Should I take your attitude as defiance toward me, your interviewer? I was frustrated, but I couldn't say anything back. The bank my father worked at, which I had always admired, I don't want to lose because of this one man. But I don't know what to say in return. Why don't you say something? Thomas further pressured me. The moment I heard those words, something inside me snapped. My consciousness fell swiftly. I became incredibly calm, to the point where I couldn't believe it myself. Understood, Thomas seemed puzzled by my response. While staring at him, I stood up from the hard metal chair. Hey, what's with you suddenly standing up? Finally, another person spoke, having been sitting the whole time. You've finally gone mad, huh? What do you plan to do? I know about you because I've heard from my daughter. It seems that the teacher and Thomas had shared information. Is this not a leak of information? Well, that doesn't matter now. I took my phone out of my bag and suddenly started making a call. What are you doing? Making a phone call? Are you making a mockery of this interview? Stop it now, or I'll reject you right here, Thomas threatened me. But I wasn't fazed at all. Then I spoke into the phone. Hello, Dan. Your father. What can a person from a single-parent family do? Clinging to their separated father, was that the laugh from the hiring manager? Yes, that's right. A guy named Thomas. Hey, Dad, can you come to the interview room now? Of course, I just finished visiting a nearby branch, so I'll be there in 10 minutes. Wait for me there, okay? And so I hung up the phone. The person in charge of the recording was staring at me with wide eyes, surprised by the unusual scene. And of course, the one who reacted the most was Thomas. Pointing at me, he said, "You're finished." Making a phone call during an interview, unprecedented. There's no way you'll pass. Go home and go to bed or something. I finally decided to argue back against him. I couldn't take it anymore. This isn't even an interview. It's you who's finished, Mr. Thomas. The chief hiring officer and the recorder were astonished by my sudden confrontation with the interviewer. Judging by their expressions, no one had been able to stand up to this man's abusive behavior until now. As evidence, the recorder's eyes were shining. Were they expecting Thomas to be punished? Thomas slammed his right hand on the table with all his might. A loud thud echoed throughout the room. The men were surprised, but I didn't flinch. And then I spoke to Thomas. "Luke Damant, you know him, right?" For a moment, Thomas had a look on his face as if I had hit a nerve with my question. He immediately countered, "Are you mocking me? There's no way anyone wouldn't know the president of this bank." To Thomas, who was confidently showing off his composure, I added some more words. "So if my last name was Damant until recently, would you think it's a coincidence?" Time seemed to stop for the three of them. The chief hiring officer and the recorder stared at me with wide eyes. Thomas then stood up from his chair and muttered, "What did you say?" His face showed a somewhat uneasy expression. "Jessica Damant. That was my full name until recently. My father is Luke Damant, yes, the president of the bank, 63-year-old Luke Damant." "What? You've got to be kidding. This can't be happening." Thomas let out a strange scream. This was no longer an interview. But at that moment, my father entered the room. As the door opened, he then said words that echoed my own feelings. "This is hardly an interview at all, Mr. Damant. Thank you for your hard work." The two men stood up and greeted my father as soon as they saw him enter. I looked at my father and felt that his presence was extraordinary. The president, Thomas's face turned pale as he muttered. His mouth remained open. My father then spoke to him, "Hey, Thomas, what were you doing to my daughter, huh?" My father was a big man who had practiced judo, and now with his shaved head and a scar on his forehead, he looked intimidating. His deep resonant voice was one that everyone found frightening. Even the confident Thomas, the moment he heard my father's voice, "Yes, sir," squeaked out. "I don't want to hear your answer." And then, Green, it seemed that Green was the chief hiring officer. This was my first time learning his name because the nameplate was bent, and I couldn't see it. "Yes, sir. Aren't you the chief hiring officer? Have you let this tyrant run wild until now?" "I'm very sorry," the man called Green bent at a 90-degree angle and bowed. The young clerk looked scared at the sight. Even he, who had done nothing wrong, was drenched in sweat. "Hey, clerk, what's your name?" My father suddenly called out in a gentle voice. The change in his voice only made it more terrifying. "My name is Finn." "Mr. Finn, can you send today's interview record to my PC?" "Of course. You're also recording the audio, right?" I later heard that this bank's interviews were not only transcribed but also recorded as backup. Thanks to that, Thomas's misconduct was exposed to my father, and he was punished. Looking at Thomas, he was trembling. He was like a frog stared down by a snake. "Hey, Thomas." "Yes?" "What is it?" The frightened Thomas couldn't even speak clearly. He was a completely different person from earlier. "Apologize to my daughter." "It's not because she's my daughter, okay? You've trampled on the feelings of young people who want to join this bank." At my father's words, Thomas bowed deeply and apologized. "Sorry, but I couldn't forgive him even after seeing that." "Dad, I can't forgive him," when I murmured that, weakly. "Of course," my father said, walking up to Thomas. It looked like a lion about to hunt a small animal. "Thomas, Do you know what will happen to you if you do something like this? My father pressured him. Thomas was frozen. You didn't just do this to my daughter, right? We'll see later in the records. But how many victims have you had besides her? No one could intervene in this interrogation-like scene. Even I, his daughter, could barely watch in silence, feeling disgusted. Thomas began to speak to my father, sweat pouring down his face. At least over 100 people, I was shocked to hear that he had done the same thing to more than 100 people. Furthermore, the fact that he was left unchecked made me doubt the hiring practices of this company. I felt distrustful, even though it was my father's company. Hey, Green, my father said, yes, I'm busy with overseas projects, so I trusted you and left the hiring to you. Well, this is my mistake in choosing people. It's my fault that it ended up like this. So, I'll take responsibility and reform personnel so there won't be any more victims like this. You two should be prepared for punishment, okay? And Thomas, I'll never forgive you, he gasped, frightened. I plan to gather all the victims and create a victims group. I'll bravely make it public in the media. I'm prepared to face any consequences, so you should be prepared too, right? Hearing this, Thomas collapsed on the spot, as if he had lost his sanity. My father moved away from him and opened a window. Oxygen returned to the tense room. Everyone had seemingly forgotten to breathe, and so, my job interview ended. By the way, I passed. It wasn't due to my father's favoritism. It was apparently the result of a discussion among hiring managers from all areas, based on the recorded audio. As a result, the hiring decisions of those who were rejected by Thomas were also reconsidered. The news broke the next day, and my father bowed in front of the media. Many people were impressed by his attitude, and he continued as the bank president. On the other hand, Green, who had been the chief hiring officer, voluntarily resigned, and Thomas was sued by the company and the victims group. Thomas, whose past tyranny was gradually exposed, was arrested for defamation. Meanwhile, at the university, "Oh, Miss Chastain, congratulations on your job offer," the teacher with a forced smile congratulated me in front of everyone. At that moment, my father and the principal appeared in the classroom. And then, "Miss Thomas, this is Luke Damant, the president of North Trust Bank." "Oh, yes, I've seen him on TV, so I know who he is." "And he is Jessica Chastain's father." "What? What did you say?" I added to the surprised teacher's words. "He's my mother's ex-husband and my father." My words caused a stir in the class. Is that so? Humans have a tendency to flatter those with power. When they realized I was the daughter of the bank's top executive, everyone in the classroom became agitated. It was as if they had wished they had been friendlier to me. "Miss Chastain's father is the president of North Trust Bank," the teacher said upon learning the truth, becoming an empty shell. The principal then said to the teacher, "This school is able to operate thanks to the support of Mr. Demant's bank. But it seems you've been bad-mouthing Mr. Demant's daughter along with the rest of the class, haven't you?" "Well, that is never mind the excuses, tell me only the truth." Pressed by the dean, the teacher finally hung her head and admitted, "Yes, Mr. Damant wants to discontinue support for this school. If those who harassed Miss Chastain voluntarily leave the school, he says the support will continue." "What? Leave the school? If you decide to stay, we intend to charge you the entire amount of the discontinued support. Naturally, I don't think you can afford it. So, what will you do?" The choice was clear to me as I listened. The teachers seemed to understand as well and ultimately resigned from the school, effective immediately. As they left, they apologized to me, but their voices were so quiet that I couldn't make it out. In the end, more than half of the classmates who had attacked me together withdrew voluntarily from the school. When my father said those who don't come forward before my daughter names the culprits will be considered for legal action, one by one they confessed. Given the power on display, it was a natural outcome. Ultimately, those people escaped legal action, but their enrollment in the university was not recognized. With my father's help, I secured a job offer, and my path after graduation was set. All that's left is to do my best for the remainder of my college life. My life is just beginning. I vowed in my heart to do my best to someday become an exemplary banker like my father.